This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a special return guest on the podcast today. His name is Ben Stuart. So he is a pastor and an author. He's the pastor of Passion City Church in Washington, D.C. And prior to joining Passion City Church, he served as the executive director of Breakaway Ministries on the campus of Texas A&M. He earned his master's degree in historical theology from Dallas Theological Seminary, just like my pastor, Mark Hitchcock. And also, more importantly than that, we got to hang out at Saturated last year. So he was one of the pastors that went down to Church of 1122 and talked during Saturated. So we did that little roundtable discussion. So if you recognize his name, that's probably from there. So in addition to all of that, we had a great conversation today. So today we talked about a lot of things. We talked about what it's like doing ministry in Washington, D.C. What are some of the struggles? He had some really interesting insights about what it's like doing ministry there in D.C. versus some other places, him being from Texas and whatnot. And then also we talked about some of the draws, okay? So, you know, for someone like that, you're in this city and you're trying to gain power, and what does that look like? And then for him as a pastor, it's like monies, honeys, and heresy. Like you're going to be pulled in all those different directions. So how do you stay away from that? But then also we talked about his new book, which is right here, Single, Dating, Engaged, Married. This is actually a re-release of a book that he did a while ago that did well. He just updated some stuff in there. But we just talk about, okay, why this book? Why an updated edition? What is it about singleness and dating that is so hard for people to navigate? You know, what does it mean to be called to singleness? When it comes to dating, it's not really described in the Bible. So how do we look at that? How do we put God first when we're single, dating, engaged, married? Like how exactly do we do that? But then specifically we go in and talk more about, you know, divorce and how a lot of guys specifically are very fearful of potentially getting divorced. We talk about purity culture because some people saw this book when it was initially released as kind of like an answer to purity culture and these people that claim to have been hurt by the whole process. So we get into that. We talk about porn. We talk about sex and the different things that go into that. We talk about guys that are stuck in like sexless marriages, like what's going on? What would he tell to guys like that? We talked about what it looks like when you're combining families during an engagement process and just really overall, and even back to the beginning, we talked about man-friendly churches and masculinity inside the church and what is biblical masculinity. I really, really enjoyed my time with him. I'm glad he was able to come back on the show. So guys, I'm not going to keep him from you any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Ben Stuart, welcome back to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. Although this time it's virtual, the first time we were actually in the same room.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I didn't think of that as welcome back, but you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess that leads to, I guess, the very first question, which is, I kind of talked about this with Derwin because I had him for a virtual interview not that long ago.
Cool.
We have terrible taste in friends. Like Joby Martin, of all people. I mean, my goodness, he invites us down to Florida and then he makes us get in a room and he forces us to talk to each other. Like, what's wrong with that guy?
It's hard. You know, it's ministry. Just trying to love a guy. But,
yeah, I mean, we got to love God and love people at the end of the day, even people like Joby. But no, here, I will give you an opportunity to give a compliment to the man that introduced us.
Hey, man, I love Joby quite a bit. And you know what's fun is I brought him up here to D.C. and he just crushed. It was so great, you know. And he was like, hey, how do you think like people will engage with me in D.C.? I was like, man, half of them are from the South. You're going to sound like home. I said, right. Half of them from the North, you're going to be like a novelty, like seeing something at the zoo. Like you're going to be a fascinating thing.
Did he wear flannel? Because that would have made it even better. He would have been definitely a Southern zoo animal at that point.
But I truly love that man. I mean, he's a recent friend and a dear one. I love him. So grateful to know him. And it was fun to be down there. Fun to meet you. It's cool. I like going down there.
Man, Saturated was something else. I mean, you walk into different places, and I mean, with you being with Passion, obviously the big conferences, and you can you've been in some of those positions before, but I just remember the first night because you wrapped up Saturated. You were the last preacher, right? Mm. And I mean, you had Jim Bergen before that. You had Derwin Gray, and and Matt Chandler, and you just had these giants. I remember the first night after Jim Bergen got done, and you know they opened up the altar, and like I remember Joby going back up on stage basically to close the night out, and he's got the microphone, and he's like holding his chest. He's like, and he just kind of says it, you know, he's like, I can barely breathe. And it felt that way. Yeah. And so like, it just seems like there's something in the water down there, but you actually brought up something that I want to talk about because you do ministry in DC. Yeah. And so you're like, I don't mean this in a bad way, but you're like a secondary church of a main church. So you're like, you know, like your own location, but you're in DC, which is like the belly of the beast in a lot of ways. You have a lot of a transient community. You have a lot of people that just moved out of there because of the previous administration. And you got a lot of people that are being invited to leave because, you know, Trump is trying to signal that we're going to be bringing down the size of the federal government and all that. But, you know, it can be a rather depraved feeling place. Like it feels very patriotic when you're there, but then when you start kind of pulling back the layers of some of the stuff that happens in that city, it's kind of the nasty part of how the sausage is made. So I guess talk to me about some of the struggles about kind of being a secondary planted church of a main brand, but also just operating in DC.
Yeah, man. I mean, Louie's been awesome. I led a college ministry for a decade plus, and Louie said, "Hey, I want to launch a Passion City church in a culture shaping city." I said, "What does that look like?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "What city?" He goes, "I don't know. You got to live there." So just this real freedom of, so we're not a traditional multi-site in a sense. We're closer to like a plant, but we've stayed connected like family, which has been great. And, if people were betting, it was on Texas. I'm a Texan. That's kind of where we thought we'd go. Yeah. But when we showed up in DC, we were praying, visiting different cities. I mean, you show up here, and a thing I think a lot of people don't realize, we didn't, man, we would be sitting at restaurants. My wife and I were like, we're the oldest people here by far. And I talked to a senator and I said, "How many staff do you have?" And he said, 120. I said, "How many are under 30? He said, "All of them."
Jeez.
And so you start doing the math and you go, this is a very young town, educated, motivated young people from all over the world. And it's been a passion of mine for years to dwell in that kind of tribe, that kind of people. And you realize a lot of them are moving here and they might be in politics, but a lot of them are just in government. They're at an agency, they're in the military, they're at the Pentagon, just over there. And so it's just this city teeming with young people, but not necessarily teeming with churches. There's some good ones, but not at the volume of other towns. And so we thought, man, this is going to be wild. I'm not a particularly political person, but this is worth failing at, to come in here and reach these young, influential, educated, motivated people. And, man, God's on the move. You go down to Florida and it's a different crowd. I told Joby, I love it. There's way more tattoos down here. People in DC get like tasteful ones you can hide under your suit. Right. But God's on the move, man. Yeah, I saw that. That looks nice, bro. But the church is growing, it's thriving. God's on the move in DC in ways that I love when people visit and they're like, this is not what I expected. I didn't expect this. And it's powerful. We're seeing a lot of people come to Christ. They came up here looking for power to fill a vacancy and it's not doing it. I'll tell you this. When I first moved up here, I met with a guy who worked at a media outlet up here. And I said, "Man, tell me about DC. Just blank question. Tell me about it." And he said, "It's filled with young men with father wounds, desperately trying to succeed to prove to somebody or themselves that they're worthy of love." I was like, dang, like I thought you were going to tell me like coffee shops or something, but he's like, and so I love speaking to, we got men and women, but I just love speaking into that. Hey, there's a bigger thing to live for. These are people who want to live on purpose and there's a bigger purpose to live for,
Okay, you brought up a couple of things there that I think are important. You said that, I forget exactly how you worded, but you're not very political. You're not like an overtly political person. Obviously, in the season that we just got out of, Ben, you had a lot of pastors that were trying to seem centrist, and it was like they just came off sounding feckless and worthless. And then you had people that went very overtly political, which is a little bit weird as well. Yeah. But the thing is like, we can't just ignore politics. Because it's one of those things where it's like if Jesus is Lord over all, that includes politics. Politics isn't that one area that, that's the third rail, we can't touch that.
Yeah, totally.
And so you don't seem like a political creature though, but how do you strike that chord of, okay, I'm a pastor and Sunday mornings is for the proclaiming of the good news of the gospel and the, exegesis of the word, right? And giving people like, hey, let's exposit and say what this stuff means. But at the same time, we have to apply it. And I use this example quite a bit. So my pastor, Mark Hitchcock, of Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma, Dallas Theological Seminary professor, solid dude theologically. We just go verse by verse by verse through the Bible. I remember a couple of years ago, it was the midterms. This would have been 2022. Mm-hmm. On Sunday, he's like, hey, on Tuesday, remember, vote biblical values. And then he just went into a sermon. And I remember going, wait a minute. Some idiots think that vote biblical values mean vote in the person that's going to allow children to quote unquote choose their gender and chop off their healthy breast tissue or their penis. And also vote biblical values might be like, hey, you know what? Abortion's kind of, it's a nuanced issue. There's a lot of gray areas. And so let's allow people to slaughter their babies in certain circumstances, but not all of them because words are some such. So how do you thread that needle, Ben?
Yeah, it's interesting how politics has become so all-consuming. We can get into that in America of just the how it's replaced religion for so many people in terms of where their interests lie and their thoughts lie. So you back it up to 8 years ago when I moved here, it wasn't even 8 years ago as central in the conversation as it became certainly during COVID and all that. So when I moved up here, my motive wasn't, I want to change politics. My motive was, I'm here to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. When I got into this town, what was interesting to me, man, is I realized, like when we started doing these groups, I was just taking them to the Gospel of Mark. And I had guys come to me and say, man, so many pastors up here, their sermons just become political, which is like, if I'm A, you're B, we're both talking about C. We're talking about some politician. And he goes, but they're reading the news, which is partially true at best. He said, so I'll show up in a sermon and this guy's railing on based on what he read in the news. And he's like, man, he doesn't quite have all the data on that. He's not quite accurate on that. And they're like, it's just, but no one challenges us on how are you doing? What are you doing? And I realized the way I can be the most influential up here politically is to go hard at these people in my church with the gospel of Jesus Christ that is going to change them from the inside out. And I'm going to speak with authority and power in the thing I know really well, which is this book. And then when I sit with them, I tell people it's been interesting being up here because it's kind of the difference between, like, certainly during the election, people were like, man, if our political discourse is like at a 10 in terms of aggression in my town, it must be at like a 20 in your town. I'm like, not really. I said, like in my town, they're like pro athletes. Pro athletes are trying to beat the other team. They're playing the game, but it's the fans and the crowd that are yelling, rip his head off, and kind of like, so I'm like, you're getting the media rip his hat off. Here, they know it's a game. So much of how the media works is a game, politics is a game. And so it's interesting for me watching some of them play it. I come to a lot of the political conversations as a learner, go and explain that to me. Help me understand that. Help me understand where you're coming from in that. And then I know for me, if I can get it on the person of Jesus, I want to see you change from the inside out. So I'm not scared of politics. I moved to this town. But the temptation here is to suddenly make every sermon about that and never get to their heart. But it was funny. I had a friend ask me that. He's like, are you going to pass out voting guides? He was in a different town. And I was like, I understand why you're asking that because that really matters. I said, but in this town, no one's wondering if they're going to vote.
Yeah, right.
I was like, that's not even a question they're asking. But a lot of them are showing up at our doors that don't know anything about Jesus or the Bible. And I'm getting to challenge their worldview in a profound way that has political implications. So.
Well, and that's kind of what we do on the show. I tell people all the time, like, hey, in a nutshell, what's your show? I was like, we cover faith, culture, and politics, not necessarily in that order and not like, evenly distributed, a third. Sometimes there are times where it's warranted to spend the entire time political, the entire time cultural, and there's always the faith element that runs through, even if it's not the overt point of that episode. Yeah. But it's interesting to hear your approach to that because of what you also said about what that guy told you about what you have all these dudes walking around with father wounds that are trying to prove something, right? They're trying to stick their chest out and peacock and like accomplish something. And maybe that comes through influence, through power, through any of the other things that are the temptations of this world. Which that kind of gets into my area, Ben, because I was put on this planet to equip men to push back darkness. And for years, I would get asked by pastors and just people at churches like, hey, we want to start a men's ministry. Or, hey, we want to do men's ministry. We want to do it better. We want to do all that. But what they meant is we want you to tell us what content to give to our guys that we force to get into a room at 6 a.m. on Saturdays and circle up like women do and chat, right? And so it's like, this isn't men's ministry. This is women's ministry that's been repackaged for men. So I don't even talk about men's ministry anymore. I talk about man-friendly churches. Is your church man-friendly? Does it have a blinking neon sign outside, or it may as well have that says, men, we don't have you in mind. We are going to be singing songs that are not in a key that you can sing, that has homoerotic lyrics, and the pastor is like the least manly, most frumpy, doughy dude that you've ever seen in your life, and you're like, I think I'll go to the shooting range as opposed to hanging out with these doughboys. And so it's like part of how you get at the father wound that you see in your city, Ben, is that you model the manliness, the totality of manliness, not just beef jerky and dirt and blood on your boots, but the entire panoply of manliness that we see in Jesus Christ. So how is it that modern pastors can do that, your congregation included?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. I wrestled with for years, what does a man do? Like, how do you talk about manliness that doesn't skew into caricature? And what really got me with that was looking at guys that are like, okay, if I make manliness like primarily physical in its nature. What about the guy who's got severe physical limitations, like a good buddy of mine? I go, am I telling him he will never ascend to the role of man? So I realize as a pastor, if I'm going to preach on what a man is, what's something that can accommodate that guy, or that guy that, was injured in warfare and can't do some of these things. How do you define manliness to him? And it was profound for me, man, to get into Genesis and see we're made in the image of God. And what did God do? The world was at the Genesis chapter 1, right? There was the world was formless and void, and there was darkness over the deep. Formless, there's no structure, and void, there was no life. And so God exerts his will on chaos, and in the first 3 days, he builds structure, sea, air, and land, right? The teleological support structures for life. And then in the next 3 days, he fills them each. And you go, God built a structure for the sake of flourishing of life. And then he tells the man, do that. Cultivate and keep it. Keep means protect. Keep out that which would harm life, and cultivate. Create an environment where the life under your influence can flourish, right? That's what a man does. And so there is a physical element for men to do that. We got to push back the dark. We got to push back dangerous things. But you also got to create an environment where your wife can flourish, your children can flourish, your business can flourish. Anyone under your influence can flourish. And so I hit that message hard about men, what we're meant to do in terms of cultivating and keeping. This is what Jesus did. I'm going to die. Why? To make war on the devil and to make my bride pristine, right? To cultivate and keep. And so hammering that message home to men and speaking to men, then they know you're talking to me, and it resonates with the soul of men. Men are made to do that. They resonate with that deeply. Yeah, I'm going to cultivate and I'm going to keep. I'm meant to do that. And when they understand that and understand we're going to value that and keep speaking to that, I think they show up. And, in my town, it's cool because, being a portable church helps with that too, because you kind of get baked in like, hey, we need some dudes to pick up stuff and move it and carry it. And, men tend to build bond over shared experience. And so we have a lot of shared experience that men do, from like setting up programming and all that kind of stuff to the mall. Bunch of dudes go work out on the National Mall once a month. And we just have different places where men can fit in, and you go, this makes sense to you. We're not going to make you sit in a circle and just talk about your feelings.
Hey guys, real quick. As you've heard me describe before, I am incredibly conservative about the supplements that I take. I spent years being terrified of putting different products in my body because I didn't know what they were made with, or if it was going to be kind of fly-by-night companies using all kinds of crazy ingredients. So I've always wanted to partner with an American company that only uses the highest quality ingredients, and that's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Jocko Fuel. Jocko Fuel is Jocko Willing's supplement company that is based here in the United States. So what are some of my favorite products that they make? So they make whey protein powder, and guys, they just released a cookies and cream flavor not that long ago, and it is ridiculously good. Make sure you use it with milk. It makes it even better. They also make clean energy drinks. I finally decided what my favorite was, and that's pink lemonade. That is my favorite of all their flavors. But they also have the best tasting greens powder on the market. I prefer the peach flavor myself. They also make pre-workout and ready-to-drink protein. So I actually mix the ready-to-drink protein in my boys' milk, and they love it. They're constantly like, Dad, banana milk. So we got to hook that up in the Thompson household. But I also use their krill oil, fish oil, creatine, vitamin D, and their sleep aids. And guys, they've got new stuff coming out all the time, and a bunch of stuff I didn't even have time to mention. Guys, if you take your health and wellness seriously, then you simply can't afford to put cheap and inconsistent supplements inside of your body. Try Origin out today by going to www.jockofuel.com. That's jockofuel.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off your order. Again, that's jockofuel.com, promo code Undaunted to get 10% off your order. Yeah, and that's kind of the thing is men default to connecting shoulder to shoulder before they connect eyeball to eyeball, and women default to connecting eyeball to eyeball and really could care less about accomplishing things shoulder to shoulder. And so giving your men opportunities to do things, but also it's just service. Okay, so I'm with you. Like, dude, I'm in really good shape. I take fitness very seriously. If people come train with me, like it's an experience, right? Well, we'll put it that way. But like, I don't put the value of my manhood in the number of pull-ups that I can do or how fast I can run a mile. Like I put it in the person and work of Jesus Christ, but also we are given one body and we are to steward it well. And so if you are physically capable, I am to call you up to something as a man to say, no, being in the state that you are in right now physically is not acceptable. What if God needs you and needs your body in order to do his work and you're not ready for the task? It's like in Nehemiah, like it wasn't like, all right, we're going to rebuild the city walls and defend them. But hey, we're going to spend 90 days getting everybody in shape to make sure that we can carry everything, to make sure nobody gets sore as they're swinging their swords or spears around. Like it was like, no, like we're ready. We got to be ready right now. And that's what resilience gets into. But for our discussion, I guess, there's this idea, and I get invited to come on places all the time to talk about biblical masculinity. Yeah. And what these people typically want are examples of manly dudes from the Bible, but they miss out on some of the structural elements of what a man even is. And so we default to what you were talking about earlier, caricature. So it's big muscles, big trucks, dirt, killing animals, and all that stuff, which, as Joby would say, those things don't make you a man. They make you awesome. They don't make you a man. And so with that in mind, I'm also aware of the guys that are a little bit more, shall we say, emotive in their personalities. They're drawn to poetry and classical music and, cooking and artesian this and that. And I'm like, great. I don't care what you're into. I care if you cultivate spiritual, mental, and physical resilience on a daily basis. And if you love God and love your neighbor, that's what I care about. That's what makes you a man. But let's just, talk a little bit about biblical masculinity and the elements therein.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think for a man, they walk into any space and go, God has put me here with a clear call from Genesis. This is my creation mandate. Whatever I have influence over, I want to create an environment, a structure where life can flourish. And so I want to do that. If I run a kitchen, I'm going to create one where the people under my care are going to make the best food possible and they're going to maximize their gifts under God. If I'm a husband, I'm going to create an environment, not where I give my wife everything she wants, but an environment that's conducive for her growth as a woman under God, because that's what Jesus did, right?
Yep.
He sacrificed and provided for his bride. That's what we do. And it's interesting, man. There's a book you'd love called Manhood in the Making. You ever read that?
No.
Manhood in the Making. It's not a Christian book. It's an anthropology book. And so the guy doesn't even have like some point he's trying to make. He's just studying cultures. And his thesis is, why are there rituals to make you a man and women don't have those rituals?
Yeah. That's an old book. Yeah, I've heard
real old. David Gilmour. But it's awesome to see, like, he was like, you just get down to a tribal experience and you go, the women are caring for the babies. This guy has to go get protein. So we live. Right. And so then you start backtracking these characteristics. So he's got to have courage because he's got to walk out into that jungle. He's got to have a skill set that's crafted and learned. So he's got to have some character of courage. He's got to be able to develop a skill set. But then if that man fails to share the kill, you're not a man because you're selfish. And
you won't be a leader for long.
Yeah. You sacrifice and risk what? For the sake of the tribe so that life can flourish. And it gets twisted. So when you read Manhood in the Making, like some of it gets twisted, and the way you get protein is you steal it from others and murder them. You're like, okay, that's where sin is distorted humanity. But you see like those echoes from creation run deep in us. And you've got guys, I mean, I see them up here. They are courageously making decisions to help America, their office, someplace, a structure where good can flourish. And, they may not be a big dude. They may be 140 pounds, but they're a hero because they're courageously doing good and cultivating.
Right. And I know plenty of dudes with neck tattoos that are bad dads. It's like they might be able to win a street fight, but they don't take care of their kids. Like I know because, I do jujitsu. And so I think of things in terms of belts. Like, okay, because y'all say all the time, it's like, oh man, I may be a brown belt in jujitsu, but I'm a white belt in that, like whatever that is. And you have so many guys that are pursuing being a bad dude that can fight when it comes to actual physical conflict. But when it comes to emotional conflict, like with one of their kids or with their spouse, they're tapping out. They're a white belt, right? And it's like, hey, brother, there's a massive inequity here. And the same thing is true. And I have to check myself sometimes because I look at the number of hours spent working on my fitness of my body as opposed to the fitness of my soul. And I tell guys all the time, like, hey, if you want to be a prepper and you've got, your solar panels and you got barbed wire around the edges of your property and you got, cans of water spread out all over the place, I'm for that. But guess what? you're going to die someday, and all you've done is gather up all that material for some other chimp, right? And so it's like, if we're only worried about this world, that's only going to get us so far. We're prepped for this one, but not the next one. And again, there's a major inequity there. But one thing that this kind of all kind of points to, doing ministry in D.C., dealing with all these men that have all these father wounds and a myriad of other issues, it leads into problems for you as well. Because we've seen, and, I remember Matt Chandler at the Acts 29 conference talking about, someone challenged him to write the names of the men in his life, like write them on the inside of his Bible that have disqualified themselves from ministry, right? Joby talks about it all the time. Monies and honeys gets lots of pastors, but I'll add one, heresy, right? So monies, honeys, and heresy. So you got dorks like Rick Warren posting things online, or, Russell Moore, any of these pastors you're not allowed to talk about lest you be divisive. But you have these people that are proclaiming things that are abiblical, but they are very political, and they are very nice messages that sound good and they sound winsome, but they're needlessly feckless and worthless and vapid. There's just nothing there to them, and they certainly don't point to a biblical gospel-centered ethic. And so for you, I could see how that would be an easy pull to where it's like you're in the epicenter of monies and honeys, right? And their influence on the power structure of the most powerful country in the history of the world. And then also it could be very tempting for you to be like, you know what? Let's just ignore those parts of the Bible that seem real icky and offensive. Let's just go to the love stuff. Let's talk about Jesus the hippie and not Jesus the Lamb of God. Yeah. So how do you personally, Ben, batten down the hatchets and say, no, I'm going to be a man about the book. And if you're offended by the gospel, that's fine. I'm not going to be offensive in my presentation, but let's let the gospel be offensive. Let's let the law be a mirror to our life. And I'm just going to stand on the word of God and let the arrows come my way.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple things. One, I did this all through ministry. I did it in Texas, but I do it more here now. We hand out Bibles, or if we're going through a book of the Bible, we'll hand out like a scripture journal. Cause I'm like, I want all of you looking at this. Then we'll put it on the screen, and I'll tell them, I am explaining to you the word of God. So if you don't like this, you can be mad at me if you want, but I just want you to be clear who you're mad at, because I'm going to present to you what the word of God says. And people are coming to our church and a lot of non-Christians are coming, I think, because the person of Jesus is interesting. The scriptures are interesting. They want to understand it. And I'm like, that's my job, is to explain it, not to change it. It's that old illustration of a waiter doesn't change the recipe from the kitchen to the table. You just deliver it. So I go, that's my job, is to deliver this word to the people. And then part of that is that courage of, I've told my staff that I was like, look, I'm not trying to get the mob with the pitchforks and torches to come to our church, but when they do, I won't necessarily be surprised, maybe a little disappointed, but you just can't read the Old Testament like a Jeremiah and just go like, man, that's the call. Like, God calls people to preach a word, and sometimes they celebrate you, sometimes they stone you, but you got to be faithful. Who am I serving? Who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for the approval of man or the approval of God? So I kind of had to cross that line of going like, I'm doing this for the Lord. And so I just got to take the hits that come. And Jesus said it, woe to you when all men speak well of you. So, we get hate mail. And for me, it's a comfort. You want the right people to hate you for the right reason. Like you said, not needlessly offensive, but they crucified Jesus. So there's going to be people that hate you because of what you represent. You're the stench of death. So I try to do that. But in that, I also, I just love that Jesus would sit with anybody, sit with a Samaritan woman, sit with a Pharisee. And for me, I'm like, I'm here to reach this town with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'll sit with anybody. And I love, one of my favorite things to ask, I teach my guys this all the time. When you talk about theology, the most important thing to ask is, when you say those words, what do you mean? And if you can get someone talking about what they mean, what they care about, you can often get to, like a good doctor, the more questions you ask, the deeper you can get to a wound and you know how to cure it. I like sitting and talking with people that profoundly disagree with me, and just go, not be scared of that, and just go, okay, let's visit about that. If you're willing to, let's just talk about where that comes from. And I'll let you, like Francis Schaeffer, if I got an hour, I'll spend 55 minutes asking questions and then 5 saying what I think. And so anyway, that's kind of how I've come to try to approach it. But
well, and that's questioning strategy. I tell people all the time, the best advice I could give to a salesperson from a long sales background is you don't get paid on the information you give out. You get paid on the information you bring in, right? So if you're selling cars, if you listen long enough and ask the right questions, they're going to tell you exactly what they're looking for. Same with houses or insurance or whatever the thing is. It doesn't guarantee the sale, but it certainly gets you a lot closer. And I think that it's a call to action because this is a guy, me, that works in a parachurch ministry. You are a pastor, a lead pastor of a church. But my encouragement to men all the time is to do everything they can to steal, S-T-E-E-L, to steal the nerves of their lead pastor. To say, hey, pastor, if you start going at some of these more hot button issues and standing on biblical grounds and say, no, we shouldn't murder innocent image bearers of the womb when they're residing in the bellies of their mothers, or no, we should not allow, children to choose their gender. Like, no, we should not do these things or those things. That doesn't lead to human flourishing. I'm going to stand and take some of the arrows for you, which again is a little bit disjointed because the pastor is supposed to be the one that's protecting its sheep, right? But just tell him like, look, dude, I got your back, right? If you need people to get your back, guess what? I got a dozen guys sitting in the lobby that also booked appointments with you. They're going to come in here one right after the other and tell you the exact same thing. Let's all move together. Let's storm the gates of hell and push back darkness as a unit. So anyway, I appreciate you letting me kind of bounce around all those different topics, but we do need to get down to a little bit of business for today because you, sir, have recently re-released a book. Okay. So you're not just so important that you released one, you re-released it because it's that awesome. So the book is Single, Dating, Engaged, Married, Navigating Life and Love in the Modern Age. Now I'll be real honest with you from the beginning, Ben. It's just me and you talking. Okay. I was not pumped about this book. I was like, I want to read a book about dating. How lame is that? Like, this is a man's podcast. All these dudes are married. We need to get them squared away. We need six packs in this audience and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and then I actually put that aside and started to dig into the content, and there's a lot there, and we're going to be getting into a lot of the different individual things, but let's start 30,000 foot view. Why this book? Why now? Why you? Why an updated edition?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. Well, I don't fault you for not wanting to read. I didn't want to write it initially. I was like, I don't want to be the dating guy. I'm not interested in that. It started in my 20s at a personal level. I just dawned on me, God doesn't owe me a marriage. Like, I want to get married, but if I make that and so you owe that to me, God owes me nothing. He can kill me tomorrow and I'm not a victim. So then it led me down okay, I was the last of my friends to get married. I'm like, then what is singleness for? Because I think the default assumption for people was it's to get married or to make money or whatever. And so I just, I think it was transformative for me reading 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul says, talking about his singleness, is to secure an undistracted devotion to the Lord. That singleness, God gave all of us that season. It exists to secure something, an undistracted devotion. I'm going to get real good at being beside you, God. And that, for me, that transformed my single years, man. And I got a little extreme with it. I got rid of my TV, started writing out books of the Bible by hand. I'm like, if this season is for God to know him and make him known, I'm going to know him as best I can, and I'm going to build up the church as much as I can, because this single season will end, and I want to cross the finish line, and when it's in the rear view, know that I did it well. And then the dating side, man, I became a college minister, and this will date me, but right when I started, my students were like, hey, man, this thing came out called Facebook. You should check this out, bro. And you're watching the iPhone kick on and then social media kick on. And I watched in a 10-year span, I'm standing in the middle of 20-somethings and watching that natural human experience of pairing off is getting more confusing, more complicated. They're more sad. And I just stood there and going, someone needs to help them navigate what is an increasingly complicated landscape. And so that's why I did it. And it did, really well, I think, because it was trying to give biblical principles to a confusing moment. I re-released it to update some of the statistics, and then everyone just kept asking, can you write a chapter on how to break up? You got single, dating, engaged, married. What about single, dating? How do I get out of here? And so we needed to create that chapter too. So
that should have been the shortest chapter. It's just pop smoke, tell her no thank you, I'm out of here, and don't do it via text. Okay, let's get out of here. You went into way more detail. But in the introduction, you do talk about how the death of marriage has been greatly exaggerated at this point. Culturally, we're talking about it because there are things about people getting married older than they normally did, which is also affecting the amount of kids that they are able to biologically have, which affects, replacement rates and economies and all that stuff and all that.
Yeah.
But I think there's a very visceral fear of divorce. And you do address that in the book. So, we're going to make our way through, single dating and all the way through the different elements of the book. But man, when I talk to guys, and these don't have to be guys that are like Andrew Tate dudes or they're, in the red pill movement or anything like that. But when you get a firsthand look, and I got a front row seat to this as a child, to the state being able to dictate how often you're allowed to let your father speak into your life, or how often you're able to see them, or being used as a pawn between a mom and a dad that hate each other. And, hey, I'm going to threaten you with this and I'm going to threaten you with that. To a young man, he's thinking, wait, so I'm supposed to work my entire life, work myself to the bone, and provide for a family, only for my wife to decide she wants out at some point, or to blow up our marriage in some way, and then I have to give her half of my crap, and then I'm expected to do that again with another person, so now I got to half my crap. And it's just like, it's overwhelming for a lot of guys, and so they're like, I think I'll just watch porn and play video games. Right? Yeah. That seems way easier than having to risk the amount of chips that you have to do in a marriage ceremony. But again, I'm throwing a lot of tendrils out there. It's the closest we get to understanding how Jesus loves us, because he sacrificed his life for his bride. We don't understand that when we're looking at porn and doing fantasy football lineups, right? Yeah. So we have to enter into that. But God, it's terrifying. So let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, divorce is so common that people think it's normal, and it's not normal. The way it devastates us emotionally, the fear it puts in your heart is pervasive. I mean, I remember listening to an interview with Kurt Cobain, and it was like, why is this guy so depressed? Why is his music all so angry? And he said, it started when my parents divorced. That's secure. That love of your parent is supposed to create the security that, I mean, you can look at the studies. A child from a loving two-parent home is more curious about the world and courageous in their engagement of it. And when you wipe out that security, they're more cautious, guarded, fearful. It lodges damage in the heart of that kid. And it's
you're like so emotionally stunted. Yeah.
Yeah. That people are like, oh, whatever, it happens. You go, yeah, but it's not good. It's bad. Yeah. It was profoundly disappointing for me, man. Like when I started dating Donna, we had the season in our dating where I suddenly got real insecure, like what's she doing, who she with, why is she with that guy? And I was like, why am I becoming this paranoid dude? And I had a friend tell me like, hey, like she's not doing anything. That's not her. There's something going on in you. And I realized, oh, I liked being single. I liked the power of not being attracted to a girl. And I was really falling for this girl. And it scared me that I could get hurt.
Yeah.
And I realized, oh, I don't want to live by fear of anything. I don't want fear to drive anything. So a wound is getting exposed. Lord, would you heal that? Would you help me trust you and be a courageous, gracious person with Donna? And I don't think a marriage heals all your wounds, but that dating process surfaced some wounds that the Lord was able to heal for me. And yeah, so I think divorce does a damage that we tend to downplay, that you got to look at and go, I think a lot of guys, for me, my dating world was chaos because of that. And so I had to stop dating and go, man, I got to get some counseling. I got to get myself right. Somebody help me figure out why I'm doing some of the stuff I'm doing before I can get this relationship with a girl right. But I think the challenge for a lot of guys today is technology. I mean, you've got some of the brightest minds in the world creating technology with the purpose of just sucking in your attention. And it's defense. They're just running out the clock on you so you don't score points, so you don't raise godly kids, so you don't build a great ministry. You've saved 1 million fantasy worlds online, but you haven't really engaged the human suffering in the real world. And I just think, I don't get mad at guys about that. I just go, you're missing out, man. You're missing out on what life's really about. And porn is a cheap substitute. Louise Perry wrote that wonderful book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And, she said porn is for sex what McDonald's is for food. Amp up the flavor and strip out the nutrients. So I don't fault guys for being curious about sex and interested in it. I just go, but you just got to hate this distortion. This is a lie. And this is a distorted version of a good desire for you.
Well, it all comes back to, are we putting God first? And that's really where you kick off the book, is putting God first. So whether you are single or dating or married or what, like, are we putting God first? I had a conversation with a guy here recently whose divorce, had a pretty horrible marriage, and a really diabolically evil woman, I think, is what he was married to, and no longer in that relationship. And he's lonely right now, and he wants that relationship. He wants that connection. I'm sure he wants to have sex. I'm sure all those things are all kind of coalescing and flowing around in his mind. And I just kind of said, hey, man, are you currently the guy that the woman you want to be with wants to be with? Are you that person, right? And he's like, well, no. I'm like, well, maybe we should start there. Maybe we put God first, which is not the answer you want, right? The answer you want is like, hey man, slay and date. Let's go. Like, let's just like sling it everywhere you want. And like, let's just do it. And you'll find some low discernment woman that'll marry you. You already did it once. Let's do it again. And so it's like, but that's really not the answer. But practically speaking, Ben, how do we put God first in those different categories? The categories being single, being in the dating side, the engaged side, the marriage side. How do we do that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, man. I mean, for me, I realized every dating relationship of mine was ending in chaos. I'm like, the only common denominator in these is me. So there's something broken in here. And I go, all right, let me just take a pause here. And like I said, that's where 1 Corinthians helped me. If Paul said, it's to secure an undistracted devotion for the Lord. If all things are made by him and for him, which the Colossians said, so I'm made for God. The word devotion in Greek is the word good and beside. Let me get real good at being beside you. And like I said, for me, there's that informational element of I would write out books of the Bible. Like I want the word of God in my mind. I want it to be the default switch for my assumptions of how I'm making decisions. And then I would write it out in one color. I'd write out my emotions in another because I'm like, I want to watch Ben deal honestly with this. And so I would get real honest with God. Like in a journal, like, I don't believe that. You sound rude here. I'm mad about this. You didn't give me this. And I would just see where my thinking was distorted and let my thinking and feeling bend around the word of God. I took a lot of walks in the woods with God, did a lot of writing out of his word. And then I just decided, you know what? I was always on the fringes of my church. I'm going to get involved and I'm going to try to build a ministry in my church, and was able to build something. And you realize how hard it is. You start seeking out wisdom, wise counsel. I started seeing kids in our church that were healthy kids. And so I would interview their parents because I realized I don't know what a man in a household looks like. So I just got into a church community and started finding the guys that I saw not are talking a big game, but you are producing a good life. You got an admirable son. What did you do? You got a happy wife. What are you doing? And it was in that matrix of the word of God, honesty in my soul, in the community of God, doing the work of God. That's devotion. And in the midst of that, God was using all those elements to heal me. And so when I met Donna, I was like, I actually am in a healthier place to date. I'm not looking to her to fill some vacancy. I'm good. Me and God are running full speed. And I want a girl that can run alongside me. So I tell people a marriage is not looking into each other's eyes saying, you complete me. It's I'm running hard after the Lord. And I look, and like David with Jonathan, I'm running after the Lord, and I look, and there's a brother right there. He's going to become my good friend. There's Samuel. He's going to become my mentor. And then you see a girl that's cute and you're like, and that might be my wife that we're going to run together. And that's how you want to do it. But start running, man. Start running in the path of God because his commands are going to set you free.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things. I hate being one of those people that's just like, hey, just do whatever and God will figure out a way to bless you. It's like, not quite the do whatever stuff. It's like, I think you might need to do the stuff he tells you to do. Yeah. And then like, but there is something too. The moment you stop worrying about something, it tends to figure itself out, right? Or God tends to put the people in your life that help figure it out. So that's certainly the element there. Yeah. But let's get into like the single and dating side of things, okay? Yeah. So there's a lot of confusion, Ben, about, okay, are you called to be single? Or do you just not take enough showers, right? So some dudes are like, they're just a little bit too fat, a little bit too slovenly, a little bit too unimpressive. And so they're an involuntary celibate, they're an incel, but it's not because they were called to singleness, it's because they currently suck at being a human being. Yeah. So there's that side of things. Then there is the element of being called to singleness as a blessing, like we see with the Apostle Paul, like that's what you're here for. Yeah. But then when you're getting into the dating world and you realize, okay, I'm not called to singleness, it's like, all right, I'm going to go to the Bible and I'm going to flip to the back and I'm going to go to the dating section. Shoot! There's not a dating section in this book. There's courtship, kinda, and then there's like arranged marriages, and then there's like stealing women and claiming them as your own inside your own harem. And so it's like, well, this isn't exactly how we're supposed to do things in modernity. So singleness, biblical dating, what in the world are we supposed to do?
Yeah, man. Yeah, there's no passage on dating, but it's interesting. You read like Proverbs, and Proverbs has passages like it's better to live on the corner of a roof than in a house with a contentious woman. You're like, that's not written for the married guy going, now you tell me, come on. That's not, that's for the single man going, here's the kind of woman you want to be looking for. Or a man who can't control his anger is like an unwalled city. Don't date a guy that's an angry man, because you will never be safe. He's like an unwalled city. You will not be safe in a home with that man. So you get this wisdom literature that's showing you how to evaluate. So I tell people dating is a modern convention, and it's not the best version. Every version of pairing off has had pluses and minuses, but the biblical principle of evaluation is true, you know? And I tell people, you're looking for cause. Are we running the right direction? Are we both chasing the things of God? Because you see, when people get divorced, what do they say? Our lives went different directions.
Yeah.
You know, what do you mean by that? You don't mean like you're an engineer and she's a lawyer. You're talking about in the big value shaping decisions of life, y'all were chasing different values, because what you value determines your values, determines your decisions, builds a life. And so you go, if I'm chasing the Lord, I want to be running alongside someone who has that same value. And then you look for character. Can I trust you? So when you're spending time with them, you go, does this person lie to me? Are they always in arguments with their roommates? Do they never have peace? Do I listen to them tell little white lies to their work? Then faithful with little, faithful with much. If they don't do good conflict resolution with their roommates, will they ever forgive me? And so as you're spending time with someone, you're going, where is their life headed? And can I trust them with the deepest resources of my recluse of my heart? And so that's where I think in the Bible, we have tons of information about how to evaluate who you should lock your life up to and run with, you know? And chemistry is what I say is the last thing. Like, do y'all get along? Does she make you laugh? Is that fun? You know? And I get that Song of Solomon, you know, the dominant metaphor in Song of Solomon is springtime. Hanging out with you feels like life. And that's the part that's can sometimes be the hardest to discern. I tell believing guys, if you get those first two criteria, she's got to be chasing the Lord and have a God-shaped character, you've eliminated most women on the planet. All that's left is a handful of wonderful women. And then the hard thing is just like, do y'all like hanging out?
Well, and Ben, stop looking for the one. Everyone's out there because we've been marinated in this milieu of the Notebook and romance novels and modern dating techniques where it's like, just find the one that makes you come alive, the blah. It's like, no, if at any point in human history somebody didn't marry their one, they ruined it for everybody, because that person was meant for someone else and that person was meant for somebody else. And so we've been absolutely destroyed by the entire thing. So stop doing that. And I think part of it is we think that we should be able to subsist on feelings, right? It's like, how much of marriage is a decision? How much of it is like, I'm going to choose to love my wife right now because she's being really, really unloving. And so a lot of it comes down to decisions, not feelings. But inside of this whole dating and singleness side and really on into relationships, we've seen this new modern trend of attacking so-called purity culture, right? So you had the purity movement, what had that been, late 90s, early 2000s, you know, I kissed dating goodbye, and you had all these different things, purity rings, worth the wait, true love waits, all that type of stuff. And look, I didn't grow up in a family that went to church. I started going on my own, and at, you know, the age of 15 or 16, I was one of the nerds that was wearing a ring that was like, no, I'm going to be a virgin. And, you know, I stand here today and the only person I've had sex with is my spouse, right? That's my wife. And so, but there's so many people now, there's so many think pieces about all the hurt and all the harm that came to these people from the quote unquote purity movement. And the thing is like, if somebody goes outside of what biblical dictates would say that they do and they lord that over you, like obviously that was inappropriate, but part of it's like, life's tough, get a helmet, like pull your pants up and just move on with your life. But you have so many people that are using that now as a crutch, Ben, as, well, you know what, we're just going to get rid of this. I think the whole reason is Satan is very, very good at, let's actually take hurt that people, you know, experience during this purity time period. And let's now say the biblical definition of what is good and God-honoring sexuality must be questioned as well. How do you rot something like that out from the very inside? And so I want you to talk a little bit about that, because you didn't really explicitly go into purity culture in your book that much. You just kind of like mentioned it here or there. But what's your read on that whole situation?
Yeah, it was interesting, man. When I wrote the book, every now and again, I go to places and people are like, did you write this as a response to I Kissed Dating Goodbye? Because when I wrote it, there weren't a lot of, now there's, I think, a lot of dating kind of conversation and books out there. When I wrote it, I think the last one was I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And I was like, I didn't read that book. That's not really how I grew up.
Yeah, me neither.
I was like, so I wasn't reacting to that. And honestly, man, it made me feel really grateful. I was like, God gave me good mentors. So I didn't have a lot of church baggage. So a lot of my life isn't reacting against a legalistic church because I didn't have one. So, Martin Luther says it, in his way that the human flesh is like a drunk on a horse. It can fall off either way. You can fall off towards legalism and just be a tyrant, or towards license and just be, reprobate. And we tend to do both. And there's some people that are like, hey, there were so many legalists in the church, so now let's take all boundaries off sexuality. You go, that's not the win to fall off the horse the other side. It's going, no, what does it mean to ride with the Lord? And, as it relates to sexuality, that's what's fun for me, man, being up here. Is you go, you've got a lot of people that aren't believers. And, it's become very natural now. We've moved sex to early in the dating relationship. But now you got secular books like Christine Emba's or Louise Perry's that are like, hey, I don't think this was good for us. I think taking sexuality out of the confines of a loving commitment was a bad idea. And you're like, yeah. And so you're watching a culture like fall backwards into biblical principles in the same way they did in ancient Rome. I read a bunch of books. I'm a church history major of like, why did people in Rome commit to Jesus Christ? Like, why do that if it would cost you at least your job, if not your life? And for many of them, it was because the Christian sexual ethic. They said, we think it's backward. We think it's stupid. We think it's weird. And yet you're all happier than us. What is going on? And they realized, the biblical sexual ethic is not repressive. It's freedom. I use that illustration of like, do you start fires in your home? Yeah. If you brick it in with mortar and steel and brick, it'll bring warmth to you. You get that fire outside of boundaries, it'll burn down everything you love. And sexuality is that way. We've taken it outside of boundaries and it's hurt us. It hurts people, hurts kids, hurts women, hurts men. And so I'm a big fan of a biblical sexual ethic, but not out of some commitment to some repressive past. Like I said, I didn't even write in response to that. I don't think much about it. For me, I'm just like, the best way I'll tell you this, what broke my heart when I was a teenager, this guy gave me a sermon series on Song of Solomon, said, you should listen to this. I'm like, listen to sermons like on my free time? Like, I don't like listening to them at church. Like, I'm gonna be like driving a car and listen to I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. And literally, bro, I was driving a truck across Texas for work, fell asleep while driving, woke up bouncing along the side of the road, overcorrected, 180'd, almost wrecked the truck. But I was still miles from where I was supposed to like drop off my, payload. And I was like, dude, I have got to stay awake. And I had thrown these sermons in my car and I opened it up and there was one called Sex. And I was like, that ought to do it. So I put in this sermon called Sex. And this dude didn't shame you with a bunch of standards. He was literally just walking through the book of Song of Solomon. And I started crying in the car because I was like, that's what I want. And I realized that the porn I had been exposed to, the assumptions I had about women, they were a distortion of the beautiful thing God made. And he won me over to, I want to live life God's way. I want my sexuality to be, because I trust God that he knows what's best. And so that's what I've tried to do in ministry, is just hold forth the beauty of the word of God, of Jesus Christ, of his way to live life. That's where you're going to flourish. And my hope is it'll be compelling to the legalist and the person of license going, yeah, that's better.
I certainly think you threaded that needle. And there's a great quote when you're talking about sex specifically in the book. So much of what is called lovemaking in society today is just an attempt to use another person without having to take on the hassles and inconveniences of genuinely loving them. But in the end, we wound ourselves, our brothers, our sisters, and our society. And you make reference to Galatians 5, 19 through 24, and Ephesians 5, 1 through 5. Yeah. And so obviously, yes, we have shifted how things go, where we do sex first, where we don't even get to know the person's last name in some cases not even their first name. You have these OnlyFans models, as they're called, but prostitutes that are sleeping with hundreds of men in a day. They do these open casting calls. One of them slept with 1,000 men in one day. And there was one in particular, I'm not going to mention her name because I don't need anybody Googling it, but there was a gal who slept with, I think it was 100 men in one day or something like that. And she said, she's talking to this guy interviewing her, and she said by like the 30th one, I stopped making eye contact with him. Like, I can't really remember any. And she breaks down crying. Yeah. And it's like, oh, I wish I had been there. Like in that moment to say, oh, like I get emotional every time I talk about this story. Yeah. But when the woman with the problem of blood, I don't know why this story, like The Chosen changed that story for me, because it was like a 3-episode arc where it's like 4 sentences in the Bible. Mm-hmm. But he calls her daughter. right? And this is a woman that was put out of society because of her issue with blood, her constant menstrual cycle, right? She was ritualistically unclean. She has been put outside of society. She doesn't have family anymore. And he calls her daughter. I wish I could have been in that moment to call her daughter, to say, you are a daughter of the Most High King and you are worthy and you can repent of this. And I say all that to kind of turn to a little bit of a darker side that because of what I do, Ben, and certainly because of what you do, you hear about some of the worst stories possible when it comes to sex, sexual assault, sexual abuse, pedophilia, pornography, all those types of things. But here lately, Ben, I've talked to so many men that are in what would be categorically called sexless marriages. These are people that have sex inside of marriage less than 6 times a year. Okay. Yeah. And in almost 100% of those cases, Ben, the women are in complete control of that. So they don't want to have sex for whatever reason, or they don't want to have sex with their husband. Perhaps they want to have it with somebody else or something outside of that, but they are using sex as a power tool inside of their relationship. And the level of depravity that I feel and just the angst I feel for these men and anguish that are in this situation, because guess what? They're trying to sacrificially love their spouses, and they want to have sex. They want to have that union, but now sex, this great gift from God, is being used as a weapon against them to control them, to keep them down. So what would be your advice? Because I find myself flat-footed, Ben, every time I have one of those conversations about what in the hell do I tell this dude? But it's like, what would you tell to a man like that is having this most beautiful and perfect gift used as a weapon against him?
Yeah, that's hard, man. A couple things come to mind and just kind of talk about it. I think of Ephesians 5, talking about the husband to a wife. We're meant to love our wife like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, And so I tell guys, what did that look? That gave himself up as aorist. It's not talking about ongoing. It's talking about a particular moment. It's looking at the cross. He sacrificed while we were sinners. So he didn't wait for some signal of desire for him before he initiates. So I tell people, Christ-like love is initiating. You go first and sacrificing for the sake of your bride. So what can happen in marriages is you're not giving me what I want, so I'm not giving you what you want. And this weird negotiation goes of like, who's going to give first? And I think for the man, if we're to love like Christ, you go, I'm going to initiate to create an environment where you can flourish under God. That's what I'm going to do. And so a lot of times, for women, it's I don't emotionally feel safe, so I don't feel safe emotionally being vulnerable, so I don't feel safe physically being vulnerable. I'm not advocating what you're talking about. Like, I'm not saying, hey, it's okay for women to do this or that. I'm just saying some of it may be that a guy's mad because she's withholding sex, and you go, but what is she not getting in this marriage? It's worth just getting curious about, am I creating an environment where she can flourish? Am I listening to her? For my wife and I, we realized in our marriage, we don't watch much TV. We put our phones away when I get home from work. We spend a lot of time talking, just sitting on the back porch, catching it. And I've realized with my wife, the more I can listen to her, the more safe she feels with me. And the more often that sort of becomes a doorway into physical intimacy. I think of Hosea, God gives him that tough pull, go marry a whore is what it says. And then it's tough for Gomer because he's like, Gomer, that's probably you. Like, that's a tough call for both of them, And you go, okay, he goes and after she sells herself, he finds her on a slave block and she can't get the going rate for a slave in that day. And God says, go buy her.
Yeah.
Like, dude, she wronged you.
Yeah.
A lot. Over and over again. And God says, go buy her and pay full price. And then he says, because that's what I'm doing with my people. And then he says, I will allure you into the desert and I will speak tenderly to you. So God's like, you sinned against me, but I'm not going to rage on you. I'm going to be tender with you. So I tell men, like, if the anger is escalating, whether it's hot anger, yelling, or freezing out, I would say you be the first one to disarm and just say, what can I do to serve you? And then you may need to get a referee in the conversation, man, get a counselor that can help you referee that conversation, because it probably didn't start yesterday. It probably went back to year one of marriage. Most marriages I know where it's that frozen out physically, you let little irritants like sand in a stream, a silt bed grows up and it stops the river. What stopped up your river of intimacy? It probably wasn't some big moment. It was just this slow accumulation of little resentments. And then suddenly the love stopped flowing. Y'all may need to go back and process hurts from 7 years ago. And that's not fun. But what are you going to do? You going to leave? No, that doesn't honor the Lord. And you're going to run the same play again with some other woman. Like I would fight for intimacy the best you can. And it's a difficult thing to be in that spot. I don't want to belittle it, but I would just challenge men. You're right to be mad and frustrated about not being able to have sex, but you've got to go, okay, I'm going to die for that, and go, what can I do? What tools can I employ? What situation, what variables can I change so that this marriage can flourish under God? And it may be calling for some help, getting some counselor, your church around you. But I think if you can heal that relationship, sexuality is an outflow of an intimacy emotionally.
Well, and I think as well, we're going to have to give an account for how we've lived our lives, not for how other people's have lived theirs, right? You're going to have to give an account for the influence you've had on others. But I remember asking Joby about this, and he was like, yeah, the women in these situations are being awful. They're being terrible. Like, this is so dark and demonic and sinful, and they're going to have to answer for it. And so I have to answer for my part. I can't take responsibility for both. I can't take responsibility for another adult. So that's a pretty serious topic. So let's downshift just a hair because we're winding to a close here. There was an interesting thing that I somewhat disagreed with whenever we were talking about the engagement process, which for a lot of guys in my audience, it's not a whole lot of engaged dudes. But for those of you, this is for you. But also if you're married, this should land. But in the book, you talk about during the engagement process, how the engaged couples should focus on combining the families. All right. So you have the Smiths and the Joneses, and we're going to combine these families, right? Yeah. And so I remember I think it was Mark Driscoll that first talked about, he's like, no, when you're getting married, you're the family now. You're the family unit. Her family is now extended family. Your family is now extended family. And guess what? If their cadence for Christmas and Thanksgiving and other holidays and stuff like that doesn't match the one in your household, well, guess what? It's yours that wins out. And some people are going to get their feelings hurt. But when you start having mother-in-laws or father-in-laws that get to dictate terms in your house, that is a recipe for absolute destructive disaster. And so I want to give you just an opportunity to elucidate your point a little bit further about, okay, when we talk about combining families, what does that mean and how are we going to make that happen?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I mean, Genesis talks about that. You'll leave your parents and cleave to one another. So I tell Donna, like, the innermost circle is God, you, and me. So I would affirm that, like, that is the innermost circle. And if the circle ever becomes you and your mom and I'm on the outside of the decision-making circle, that got messed up. Or like me and my mom, and no. We're supposed to leave and then cleave to each other. So I think that marriage relationship does become central in your family. But I talk to a lot of guys. This happens to me a lot on the engagement process. They're like, you know what? Her dad's not that excited about us getting engaged, but I'm just going to do it anyway. And they're like, and you're like, hey man, that man's job, as soon as he had that baby girl and watched that girl come into the world, he teared up at the beauty. And then a split second later, he thought about all the darkness in the world.
Yeah.
And he made a vow. I will rage against the dark to protect this little girl. And you are a stranger saying, give me your baby. It's right for that protective element in him to go like, who are you, man? And what you have to do is what all men do in relationships, convince you I'm a friend, not a threat. And so that doesn't become your primary job, trying to win over her dad or her mom. But those are going to be the grandparents of your kids. So just don't be needlessly offensive. So I tell people, like, if you want to have a smooth engagement, I talk about it like docking to bringing your boat into a dock. If you're good at it, it just slides up. If you're bad, you can dock up and send wood and fiberglass going everywhere and smash in. I'm like, hey, just as you're docking families, yeah, y'all are going to be the central unit here, but don't be needlessly offensive, man. So when I've met Donna's parents, it was like, hey, I just want to win them over. I want to ask them questions about their life. People love to talk about their life. Let me be genuinely interested in you. Let me celebrate all that I can celebrate in your life. Let me ask you questions. And then let me help you see I'm a competent person. I have the capacity to care for your daughter. I am concerned to do that. I know that when she gets pregnant, there'll be a vulnerability to her. I'm going to protect her. I've saved money. Like, show them you can trust me. And then it just becomes easy to celebrate. It just makes holidays easier. Like, you're going to see these people. They're going to be around. So just do your best to make that as easy as possible and not difficult. So that's what I encourage guys to do is like, hey, just think about that. You know, for Donna, I tell the story of like her dad was a mortician. When we got engaged, I showed up at their house and he suddenly got a call about a viewing. He had to dress a dead body and he had back problems. He had no one else to do it. And so I had to pick up a body and dress it. And I was like, this is not what I thought I had to do. I didn't think this was part of it, but I did it. And, man, he and I were cool ever since. I was like, you know what? Great. Good. Now we're good. And so I just think that's not your primary role, but as your families are coming together, you go, what can I do to show these people I honor them? I honor that they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to raise a child. I honor that they bring her into this life. I honor that they cared for her. As they give her over to me, let me honor them for making that choice, you know? So that's what I mean by that.
All right, living in a life in honor, guys. Single, dating, engaged, married. That is the name of the book, guys. It is in the show notes. Go and check it out. But before we let you wrap up and get out of here, you know, there's always what have you done for me now, and what have you done for me lately? But what's next is what I want to know. So is there another book in the offing? What's next for you in terms of ministries or anything you're working on that you haven't told anybody about that you're going to tell my audience about because they're cool and they stayed till the end of the interview? Give me some good stuff. Let's go.
Yeah. I've got so many different ideas of resources I want to create, man, but I'll tell you, all my focus right now is on building this church. Bro, I'm just telling you that, like, God is on the move in D.C. We are growing. We are running out of space in places, and we're in a pretty, like, we're on U Street. That's where people go to party. And we're seeing people get baptized that we were the last stop on a drunken rager through town. They stumbled in and didn't know it was a church, and now they're getting baptized up front. So, like, so much of my energy now is, Lord, help us keep expanding the power of your gospel, the size of your church in Washington, D.C. So if anyone's ever in D.C., come see us, man. The whole world is coming, and it's pretty exciting right now.
All right, very good. Well, that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, I feel good, man. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for what you're doing here, and we got to talk later. You mentioned Rick Warren, and we don't got to get into this. Russell Moore, I don't know what they said, but I've always liked Russell. Russell's always been a good guy to me, but I don't keep track with that stuff, so I don't know what's going on.
I'll give you all the dirt off air. Don't worry. I keep notes. I've got a whole Rolodex of stuff that people have said that have offended me personally, okay? Well, Ben, hey, I really appreciate your time. We'll talk again soon.
Sure. See you, buddy.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Ben, but before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got a link to Amazon where you can buy your copy, the updated edition of Single, Dating, Engaged, and Married. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.